Hello and welcome to another Sustainable Macleod workshop on Zoom. Today we're going to be discussing successful seeds and Robin Gale-Baker will be presenting the workshop. First of all though, I want to acknowledge that we're working on the lands of the Wurundjeri. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging and acknowledge their stewardship of the land. Robin was the owner of the first herb and cottage plant nursery in Tasmania, which is something that a lot of people online may not know, as well as being a founding member of Sustainable Macleod. So she knows an awful lot about growing with seeds. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Robin Gale-Baker.
Thanks, Paul. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging of the Wurundjeri people who have been such wonderful stewards of the land that we are on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you from the beginning right through to the end in terms of seeds. So I'm going to start with how to test viability of your seeds and end up with how to plant a seedling so that you don't damage it. Okay, so seed viability. Many of you will have seed packets at home that you've opened. They might even be past their use by date, but that doesn't mean that the seed isn't viable. Commercial seed producers in particular tend to shorten the viability span of a seed packet because they don't want people to put seeds in at a later date, perhaps toward the end of the seed life and get a poor result. So they tend to shorten it. So this, for example, baby leaf Provençal mix has an expiry date of 2014, but I'm still putting it in and I'm getting a very good germination. So it's really important because seeds are expensive, particularly if you're buying them commercially, and important to know how to test seeds for viability. So here's what you do. You take a piece of paper toweling, write the date on the top, write the type of seed on the bottom, and then you dunk this in water. After that, you squeeze it out, but don't do it like this because if you do, you'll find it really hard to unwrap. Here is one I prepared earlier. So just fold it several times, squish it between your hands so most of the water comes out. Normally I wouldn't be doing it like this, but because we're on Zoom, I have to tilt things. And then what you do is roll up from the bottom. What I've done here is put 10 coriander seeds across the top. And the reason that I've put 10 is that not only will this tell me whether my seeds are viable, but it'll tell me the percentage of viability. So if 7 of them germinate, then I know I've got 70% viability. If 4 germinate, then I've got 40% viability. And what that means, let's say I had 5 germinate out of the 10, and I end up with 50% viability. If I want 100 plants, I'm going to have to put in 200 seeds. So as I said, you just roll up from the top like this. So you've got a nice little roll. Put it in a Ziploc bag, which I have here. Put it in a Ziploc bag, stick it near a heat source, like on a warm vent or a windowsill or near a fire, and leave it there for 7 days. Then unwrap it and you'll be able to see if it's germinated or not. Now, what you'll get is it'll sprout. So it really sprouts rather than grows roots. So these seeds are not then suitable for planting. With very small seeds, it's almost impossible to put 10 in a row. So just sprinkle them across and see what comes up. But with the medium size and larger ones, you can work out your viability. Okay. We also have a video on our YouTube channel, that's Sustainable Macleod YouTube channel, and there's a little video about how to do that if you don't remember. Okay, now, next thing I want to talk about is the potting mix that you might use, or the seed mix that you might use. Okay, so this is really important when you're producing seeds in punnets. So I'm going to be talking about punnets first and planting directly later on. All right, so I'll see if I can stay in focus. So what I've done here is taken some seed raising mix. Can you see this? I particularly want you to see what's in the strainer. And I've strained it, and you'll see there's very little larger particles. So what we have in seed raising mix is a very fine mix, and that's ideal for seeds to germinate. This other one is potting mix. Now, I've taken the same amount of mix, but you can see just how much, when I've sifted it, is left in the strainer. And what that's indicating is that this is a much coarser mix. It's fine for planting your seedlings in once your seedlings are ready to be what we call pricked out and put into seed trays. But in terms of planting your seeds, you really need to do that in seed mix. And another reason you need to do that in seed mix is that it's not only very fine and very, very suitable for these, you know, fragile little shoots to push through, but also it doesn't have any nutrients in it, or very few nutrients. And you don't want your seeds, when they're germinating, to grow ferociously with a lot of nutrients. Essentially, you do want to starve them. You just want them to germinate. And then you move them into potting mix for nutrients at a later date. Now, the reason that you don't want to put them into nutrients is that they grow too fast and too thickly, and then you can get damping off. When they're really running out of nutrients, if you've left them in too long before you've moved them on into potting mix, they'll often go a yellow or a purple colour, or a yellow and purple colour. And that simply tells you it's time to move them on. Okay. Another thing that you can do with your mix is you can add vermiculite to it. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about perlite and vermiculite. This is perlite. Can you see that? And this, minus the bits of perlite on the top, is vermiculite. They're both made from volcanic rock, different rock, because they're very different. Perlite is primarily used for drainage and aeration because it has bigger particles, and vermiculite is primarily used for water retention. It will give a little bit of aeration, but it's primarily for water retention. These shouldn't be added to garden soil, but I'm not going to go into why that is. It can give you, you can use both of them in potting mix. I don't think it's necessary, and it certainly adds to the expense, but you can do that. But vermiculite in particular is quite good with seed mix. If you put it across the top of your punnet, it will keep the surface damp. And particularly with very tiny seeds, it's really important to keep the surface damp, because if a seed dries out, or if the surface dries out and the seed then dries out, you'll kill it. and with very, very tiny seeds that are very close to the surface, putting, say, 1/8 of an inch, what's that, a couple of mils of vermiculite across the top's really valuable. Now, both of these are very dusty and they should be wetted before you mix them. Both to keep dust away from your lungs. It's a silica, so you really don't want this in your lungs. But also it's better to do that before you put it into either the potting mix or onto the top of your seedlings. Okay. Now, punnets and seed trays. Most of us are going to be using punnets and seed trays that are second-hand. By the way, if you want any large pots, there's plenty in the crate by the gate at the community garden. Now, with second-hand pots or used pots or punnets and trays, you want to brush them out, wash them out, get rid of all the soil that's previously been there, and then rinse them off and soak them in a mix of 9 parts water, 1 part vinegar, just ordinary old white vinegar, cheap as, buy the biggest lot you can because it is very cheap, but you might as well do it to scale. And soak them for at least half an hour. The alternative is that you can spray vinegar inside each pot and punnet and tray, but I find that a real hassle. It's a lot of work if you're doing a lot of pots. Now, with your trays, make sure that you not only clean the inside, but also the outside, because you can get a lot of bugs living in the outside, spiders, earwigs, snails, slugs, and get in under the rim here. And then when you've got them, that's done again, soak the trays in your vinegar, vinegar and water solution for good hygiene. Okay, tags. Somewhere here I've got plenty of tags. If you want to make your own tags, which we do at the garden, we have tons of corflute. And even if we run out of corflute, we have so many sources of corflute. So you can just come and get some free from the garden. You don't even have to be a member to do that. We're very happy to give you tags, corflute for tags. Just use a sharp Stanley knife to cut them. Next thing is always write your tags before you put your seeds in your punnets. Use a good quality marker pen. These Sharpies are really good. They have a fine point. These ones are as cheap as, and you can buy these at Wonderland, which is the $2 shop in Macleod, next to Mr. Macleod. I think this was $3.99 for a packet of 12. Good value, I think. Now, just one other thing about tags. When you push a tag into a container, you need to push it down between the wall of the punnet and the soil. That's what keeps it secure in the punnet. You can also put it in the little slots that come at the side of a punnet and push it right down. But if you just stick it into the top like this, it will inevitably fall out. So that's just a hint to keep you on track with knowing what you've got. Now, just want to say a couple of words about where to buy seed. Now, of course, many of you will be drying your own seed from your garden, and I'll come to later to which seed you can dry and which is not viable. My favourite seed merchants are the Diggers Club, Eden Seeds, and Seed Freaks in Tasmania. All of these seed merchants do open pollinated heritage varieties, and they all have high viability rates. You can buy, cheaper seed. You buy it from Aldi, for example, or Bunnings sometimes, or you can buy it online. I've heard people complain about the cost of seed, but good seed is really value for money because the viability will be high. If you buy cheaper seed, just expect there to be quite a low viability, because that's the reason that it's cheap, because you're not going to get such a good result. If you get like 2,000 seeds in a packet, it probably is not going to matter, because you're probably not going to want to plant 2,000 seeds if they did germinate. But I think people sometimes sacrifice good germination for just, a few dollars or a few cents sometimes. Okay, let's move on. So, question is, what is a seed? Well, a seed is essentially a hard covering with an embryo inside it. And if you think about it, every living thing comes from an embryo. So when seed producers dry their seed for commercial packaging, they don't completely dry it out, because if they did, what they would be doing is killing the embryo. They in fact leave, I think it's 8% generally, moisture in the seed, and that keeps it viable. So, for example, you wouldn't put seed that you're drying out in the oven and dry it out that way, because that would kill the embryo. So really what we're doing is we're trying to get that embryo to shoot. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to planting in punnets. Now, this is August, and this is too early to put most seeds straight into the garden. You will see in your garden that there are some seeds that are already germinating. There'll be tomato seeds, parsley seeds, coriander, etc. But in general, most seeds will do better in warmer, controlled conditions. So this is the perfect time to sow your seeds in punnets. Having said that, for Sustainable Macleod, I put all our tomato seed in on the 19th of June, and it was all up 11 days later. So, Paul, could you put up the shot of the seeds that are most suitable to start in punnets, please?
Just going to share the screen. Okay. That's the one you wanted?
No, the one for punnets, please.
Sorry.
Okay. Now I want the seed list.
Okay.
I'll just start talking about it. So the ones that are most suitable for punnets are tomatoes, lettuce. Now, I'm just going to mention here that most seeds germinate in the dark, but lettuce is not one of them. Lettuce germinates in the light, and that means that you don't cover it with soil. So what you do with lettuce is sprinkle your seed over the top of your seed tray or punnet, and then you lightly press it down. You will already have dampened the soil. I'll come to that a little later. But the reason that you want to press the seed down is you want it to connect with soil so that when the roots start to emerge, they can grip and put their roots right down into the soil. Spinach and chard are another pair. That's spinach, chard and silver beet. Now the brassicas. Brassicas are a large family which include cauliflower, cabbage, broccoli, other things like kale, turnip, etc. But particularly your cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, if you're game enough to plant those. If you are, Brussels sprouts need to be planted in summer. They have a very long growing period, and because you want them ready in winter, they need to go in mid to late summer. Then onions and leeks, and pumpkin, zucchinis, cucumbers and melons can go straight into the ground, but I raise them in punnets, and I'll tell you why a little later. And then capsicums and eggplants. Now, the trick with capsicum and eggplants is that you either need to have a heat mat, and this, I'll show you a heat mat in a moment. Paul, we still don't have the right that's seeds that are suited to sowing direct into the soil on the screen.
Yes, and at the bottom of the screen are the punnets ones.
Oh, yep, I can see it there. Okay. Yeah, going back to cucumbers, capsicum and eggplant. Capsicum and eggplant both need temperatures of over 20 degrees to germinate. If you germinate them just in a normal punnet without a heat mat, they won't, it'll be probably January before they're up. So the soil temperature needs to be well over 20, really. That means that by the time they've grown big enough and you've planted them out, you are not going to get a crop. There's just not enough season left for you to get a crop. So either buy your capsicum and eggplants from a nursery or start them on a heat mat. So Paul, could you take that from the screen now?
Getting there.
Okay. I'm going to show you a heat mat. This is one we use at the community garden. It has two mats, so it's like a little electric blanket. It has a control panel, which we're setting to 20, and you plug it in. So it's very simple. What I would say about heat mats is you can get very cheap ones where you cannot set the temperature. It's just one standard temperature, and they're no good. You need one where you can vary the temperature. So here we have got some eggplants that have been on the mat for about 10 days and some peppers that have been on the mat for about 10 days. And there's no way, if I'd have simply put these into my potting shed or outside or on a windowsill, these would have germinated. Okay. Now, corn's another one that you can grow in punnets, or you can plant directly into the ground. Now, the purpose of growing in punnets is to get a head start, and you get this by providing warmer conditions. Do we have a slide on that, Paul? Advantages of growing in punnets?
Yep, I'll just put that up.
Okay. So ideally, you would place the punnet in a greenhouse or on a warm window. Now, seeds have a minimum and a maximum temperature and an optimum temperature too, in which they'll germinate. For example, carrots and lettuces won't germinate above 25 degrees. As I said before, capsicums and eggplants need above 20 degrees centigrade. Pumpkins need at least 20 degrees centigrade. You can check if you are interested on the internet, and you'll find somewhere that will tell you exactly what the optimum temperature is and what the minimum and what the maximum temperature is for a particular seed. Now, in terms of seed mix, always use a good quality Australian standard seed mix. Here we are. So these are the advantages of growing seeds in punnets. You can start growing them earlier because you can control things like warmth, water and wind, which you can't control when they're outside, direct into the ground. They're less prone to insect attack, but I would suggest that if you're that you check beneath your seed trays for slugs and snails, which do tend to like the crevices in seed trays. If you see any silver trails on your seedlings, that will be slugs or snails. It's easy to select the strongest seedlings to plant out, and particularly if you have very fine seed or very expensive seed. Like I've seen pumpkin seed that is $20 for one seed. It's pretty important that that you know where that seed is. Very fine seed like celeriac, which is the finest seed I think I've ever seen, you'll just lose if you plant directly outside. So having it in a punnet means that you can see it when it comes up and you can't mistake it for a weed or anything else. So the disadvantages are that they can suffer transplant shock when the seedlings are planted out, but usually they get over that. And if you give them a dose of sea salt, diluted, that also helps. Another disadvantage is it costs to buy seed mix and potting mix and possibly punnets. So I think that we've got enough punnets to supply everybody. And then seedlings need to be pricked out into seed trays or pots, and that's time consuming. Okay, so one bag of seed mix will usually cover you for a season. As I said before, a good quality mix will be a fine mix, and the potting mix is too coarse to allow seedlings to develop well. With bigger seed, you can use potting mix, but you've got the problem of they're going to grow too fast because they're going to be in a nutrient-rich medium. The other thing to do is not to use garden soil at any cost, because garden soil doesn't have enough aeration and it will compact and strangle the new shoots and the new roots. So what we want here is a fine tilt. Okay, Paul, can we take that from the screen, please? So seeds need good aeration. That means oxygen to germinate. They need good drainage so that they don't rot. And that's what you get with a good Australian standard quality mix. I would always, if I were buying potting mix, I would always buy it from a place like Bulleen Art and Garden, who have a very superior potting mix than somewhere like Bunnings. Bunnings just have so much what's that stuff called? Pine bark or bark in them. and very little ingredients. So it might look a lot cheaper, but we had a case last year where somebody who was growing plants for the garden bought some mix, and the plants were essentially stunted because there wasn't a balance of nutrients. And as I said before, garden mix, garden soil lacks aeration and compacts. It's also poorly drained. So I want to, I think, Paul, could you get the video ready? We've got a little video of my potting shed, which has all the plants that we're growing for Sustainable Macleod in it at the moment. Well, all the seedlings in seedling trays. Most of the potted up plants have gone to the garden. All members will get at least 6 free tomato plants. We'll find a way of distributing them, even if we've got lockdowns with COVID. What we're thinking at the moment is of perhaps putting 5 or 6 tables out in the car park, putting the same seedlings on each table and allowing people in sort of, you know, one at a time or 1 table per time, something like that. But we'll manage to get the seedlings to you. And then later on there'll be cucumbers, capsicums, peppers, zucchinis and pumpkins. So while Paul's getting the video up, I'll show you something that is on the video. Okay, so this is a tray of tomato seedlings, grossless, and I had an unexpectedly high germination. I think the reason that I possibly had such a good germination is that I fermented the seed. So I'm not going to go into how you dry your own seed today, but essentially you can, something like tomato seed, you can dry it by putting it on kitchen paper, or you can ferment it. The advantage of fermenting it is it gets rid of all pathogens and diseases. Anyway, as you can see, this is far, far too close, and I'm really worried that we will get damping off in a tray like this. So damping off is when there's too much moisture that creates a damp area for pathogens and diseases to take hold. And what happens is that the seedlings sort of, they become mushy and the stems rot. So what I've done in an attempt to stave off damping off is the first lot of seedlings I've taken right from the middle. I don't know whether you can see that. So I've got a big hole in the middle, which will allow more aeration through it. And the other thing I'm doing is just giving them the minimum amount of water they need, not too much water. What you can see here is that on the edge, these ones have really nice thick stems, and they're the ones that I would want to pot out. The ones in the middle have very puny stems. They're not going to be good, strong plants. So I'll probably pull a whole lot of those out because there's truly hundreds here. And I think I've already potted up over 100 just out of this tray alone. So, yeah, that's something that is to be avoided. So I'll point out to you better spacing on the video. So you ready to go with the video, Paul? Okay, so this is my potting shed, mud brick. So it has really good thermal mass and keeps things really warm. Just inside the door, there'll be a trough, which is an old concrete washing trough. I pour the potting mix into there. You can buy potting mix bulk from the community garden and avoid plastic. And then this is the tomato seeding. So we've got 10 varieties here at the moment. And here is that tray that I was showing you, and you can see the big hole in the middle that I pulled out and potted those ones. Now, this next tray, this is better. They're more spread out. But this tray here is really good. This is some blue pits ones. And then another way that we grow seeds is to put them into these 10-cell seed trays and just put one in each. This is zucchinis in this particular one. Just going back to the blue pits, here's a tip. We have 4 types of blue tomatoes that we grow, and they all have curly leaves. So don't think there's something wrong with your tomatoes if the leaves on the blue ones curl. Okay, that's a cardamom plant straight outside. You won't get viable seed from cardamom, but if you pick those leaves and you put something like hot rice on them, the cardamom scent will infuse into the rice. Okay, thanks, Paul. We can remove that now. Now, here's something else not to do. Some people have thought it smart to put a layer of potting mix in the bottom of their seed tray here. Sort of maybe they put 2/3 potting mix in and then put 1/3 seed mix on the top. Don't do that, because you defeat the purpose of growing in seed mix, because once the roots go down, suddenly the seedlings grow really fast, and you get that crowding and damping off problem. So I'm going to move on to how to fill your punnets. Righto. I'm at pains to try and keep all this in focus. Now, so this is, take your punnet, your clean sterilised punnet, fill it with seed raising mix. If you're an absolute perfectionist, you could even sieve your seed raising mix and fill it to just above 1 centimetre from the top. Then press it down. And the best way of doing that is to take another punnet that's full of soil and just push it into the top and press it down, and then water it thoroughly. So when you start, you want your whole punnet well watered. If you dig through it, you don't want to see any potting mix or any seed mix that is not wet. So you don't want to see any dry stuff, because you don't want to be constantly flooding your seed mix to wet it. So, and what this gives you is a really flat bed that particularly fine seed will not fall through. When seed is really tiny and the seed mix or even potting mix is really open, it will wash through and wash out the drainage holes at the bottom, and you'll lose your seed. So you need a damp, firm bed. And then once you've spread your seed mix, your seeds on the top, just cover it with, depending on the size of the seed, 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre. Sometimes the seed packet will tell you what to do, and then make sure that you keep the top sprayed. Use a sprayer, and keep, the moment you see that the top drying out, give it a decent spray of water. And if you're really not sure if you've done enough, just get your seed tag and just scrape it back a little and make sure that it's sufficiently moist, because as I said before, if the surface dries out and you have fine seed, the seed will dry out and you will kill it. Germination will generally, for most vegetable or herb seeds, be 7 to 10 days. Sometimes it takes a little longer, so be patient but generally 3 weeks would be the max. If something's not up in 3 weeks, unless it's something like capsicum and eggplant, probably your seed is not viable. Okay, so I'll show you how to transplant a seedling, and then after that we're going to have a short break. First of all, Emily's going to tell you what else is coming up, because we have plenty coming up, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back for the rest of the workshop. Okay. So here, I'm just going to scoop out a seedling from here. Okay, now you see this, I've scooped underneath the roots so that I'm not holding them, but I hope you can see here, this is at the 4-leaf stage. So there's 2 leaves there, 2 basal leaves, then there's 2 leaves up here, and these are growing into little branched leaves. When you plant a seedling, unfortunately I haven't bought a pot in, which I meant to do, but actually I've got one here. So let's put that down. Okay, I'm just going to tip this soil into this pot. So I'm just going to tip a little bit. This is seed mix, so I'll be using potting mix, but we won't worry about that. So just put a little bit into the base, and then hold your seedling by the leaves. If you hold it by the stem, you risk damaging the stem. And if you damage the stem, then that's cactus for that seedling. But if you damage the leaves, it'll grow new leaves. Now, what you want to do is tip your mix to the side, put your seedling in, holding it by the leaves, and then backfill it with mix. What you don't want to do is fill your pot, make a hole, and try and push the roots down into the mix, because if you do that, you're going to both damage the roots and you're going to compact the roots as well. So I'll just get the potting mix that I was using before and just hold this, tip it in on top. You don't have to get it straight in the pot. It doesn't matter if it's on an angle, it'll right itself. There we are. And then use your fingers to squash it in around there without touching the stem, and then give it a good water. And put your tag in and away you go. Okay. Now I think we'll take a break, but first of all, Emily, can I hand over to you?
Yep, sure. So I'm just going to have a quick chat about a few of the things coming up in Sustainable Macleod, and also share a few resources that are on our Sustainable Macleod website that you might like to have a look at. So with all of the lockdowns that have been happening, we've had to move a bunch of workshops, including today's one, online. So that's also an opportunity for us, that we can have more people along. If we're having these in person in a few weeks' time, chances are we'll still be really restricted in our numbers. So a few of the other online workshops we've got coming up in the next couple of months. We have on the 28th of August, preparing a spring veggie garden with Robin. This is a workshop she's held before. And we'll go through basics of preparing a site selection, what veggies to plant, what you should grow in punnets and transplant or sow direct, and have a chat about some of the pests that might affect your spring plants. We then have one coming up on Wednesday, the 8th of September, which is Botany for Home Gardeners. So that's a workshop that I'm running. It's the first time we've run this one, and looking to explain some of the theory around plants and how we apply that theory in our day-to-day gardening. So a lot of the things that I'll talk about will be things that you're already doing, but you might not necessarily know why we do those. We also are looking to move our new members session for the next one online. We haven't confirmed the date yet, but it's likely to be a midweek evening session, so keep an eye out for that. If you haven't been to a new members session at the community garden, I encourage you to come along. Won't be quite the same doing it online, but we'll still have a good chat about a lot of the projects happening in the garden and things that are coming up and how you can be involved. Another workshop that Jen is running in late September is fermenting vegetables for beginners. This is another one on Zoom, and she'll have a chat about basics of fermenting vegetables, differences between pickling, canning and fermenting, and using these different ways to preserve your veggies. So that'll be a really exciting workshop as well. If there's other members in this group today who have an interest in a particular topic and would like to run a workshop, get in touch and we'll see if we can pop it in the calendar for the next few months. A couple of things on our website I'd just like to show you, and I'll share my screen if I'm able to do that. So many of you have been to our Sustainable Macleod website previously. This is what it looks like. If you're not a member and would like to join up, there's a Join Us button up the top. We also have our Queensland Fruit Fly page. So this is where we're storing a lot of our resources about Queensland fruit fly. We're trying to collect some data to help gather some information. So if you've put some traps in your garden, if you have been finding Queensland fruit fly in your traps, there's some buttons there for you to send your data in. Part of our shop where you can purchase products to help you deal with Queensland fruit fly, and also all of our blog posts about Queensland fruit fly. So if you've missed out or not quite sure what you should be doing now, have a look at the blog posts. There's some really great information in there. The last thing I was going to show you on our website is the link to our shop. So it's up the top right. This is a new thing that we've just established, and it means we can do online purchasing for a bunch of items. So we've currently got bulk olive oil still for sale. You can purchase your Queensland fruit fly lures and also pay for potting mix and other things when we've got the community garden open again. If any members today were looking to just pay for today's workshop, there's also the button to pay for the workshop. So I think that's all I had to share with you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, I believe. So if we could be back here at 2 o'clock and Robin will finish off the rest of the session.
So there's a few things I've missed along the way that I just want to bring to you, and then I'll finish off planting seedlings in punnets. So first thing is, when you need to cut open a packet of seeds, look to see where the information is. On this one, it's along the bottom. On this one, it's along the top. On this one, it's along the top, and cut the other end. I tend to suggest you actually cut it with scissors, and then you can turn over the top or the bottom and staple it closed. If you want to make your own seed packets, which we do at Sustainable Macleod out of old books that we get from the op shop, that's old children's books that would otherwise go to landfill, just make sure you can just take, use as a template an old seed packet, but make sure that you fold over the bottoms sufficiently so that small seeds won't come out. Okay, now a couple of things. Always read the instructions on the seed packet. This one, for example, is soapwort. I am putting in as many herbs and flowers in my garden this year as possible to increase beneficial insects. Now, this soapwort needs to be cold stratified. It's called cold stratification. That means you store it in the fridge prior to sowing for a couple of weeks in this case. And this one, agrimony, you put the seed in damp soil and put that in a container, a sealed container in the fridge. So there are different ways, and you'll get this information from the seed pack. I particularly like Seed Freaks because it gives such good instructions about how to germinate your seed. And when I say fridge, I mean fridge, not freezer. If you freeze your seed, then you're going to kill it. Oh, okay. So a couple of more things. So if you're pricking out your seedlings from, a very full tray, you put 4 across and 5 down. So that's 20 seedlings per tray. And again, don't fill it with soil and then try and squash your seedlings in. Put a little bit in the bottom, put your seedling in and put your soil around it and firm it down so that you don't damage the roots. A few days before you want to transplant your seedlings, you need to harden them off. And that just means put them outside, unless they're already outside. Choose your time wisely. Don't choose a cold snap to do it. Choose some mild days or mild nights and put them outside so they become hard. To lessen transplant shock, give the trays a soaking in diluted seaweed. This strengthens the seedlings and reduces that shock. Now, when I say diluted seaweed, I'm talking about sea salt or maxi crop. Now, I prefer sea salt because it originated in Tasmania and is an Australian product, and maxi crop comes from the United States. So support local, use sea salt. Don't use Charlie Carp because a seaweed extract contains trace elements, but Charlie Carp, which is made from fish, carp, is high in nitrogen, and you don't want to be giving a lot of nitrogen to your seedlings when they're still in trays or when you're preparing them against transplant shock. Okay, so then in terms of planting out, plant in the cool of the day in the evening or the early morning or on an overcast day or in rain, but don't do it in hot sun. So dig out your holes much bigger than your seedling roots, fill them with water, and then place the seedling in. If you want, you can put some compost in the bottom or some dynamic lifter in the bottom. Position your plant, holding it by the leaves, and then backfill it with soil and firm it in, and then water it again. If in the next few days it's hot, shade those seedlings with something. So you could use some shade cloth. We very often just bash in for star pickets, put some shade cloth or an old sheet over the top and put the yellow tops on to secure it in place. Or you can just use an old umbrella or a beach umbrella. We keep all our old beach umbrellas. We never use them at the beach, I don't think, but they're very good in the garden. Provide some snail or slug protection, which could be something like half a milk bottle or a pet bottle container. You get 2 of these out of one milk bottle. Just push it down. This also gives it a bit of protection from wind and keeps the plant slightly warmer. Or you could use a copper tape barrier or a beer trap or some slug and snail pellets or even sawdust. And I think even coffee grounds will keep snails and slugs away because they don't like the feel of it on their soft bodies. Now, water every day until the plants are well established, and use markers to identify what you've planted. I can't tell you how many times I have put things in thinking, oh, I'll put the marker in later, and then I don't know weeks later whether it's a cabbage or a cauliflower or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to planting direct into the ground. This can be in rows or it can be broadcast, which means that you're chucking it all over the place and not spacing it in any particular way. Or you can plant in grids as you're doing with corn or on compost mounds. Now, Paul, could you put up the seeds most suited to direct sowing? So these include root vegetables such as carrots, parsnips, beetroot, swede and turnip and radish, not celeriac. That's a root, essentially a root. It's a stem vegetable really, but we treat it as a root vegetable, but the seed is far too fine to put it directly out into the garden. Now you can mix up, it said the difference between, and I can't think of it, like vegetable growing is growing in rows, and edible gardening is growing where you've mixed your plants up so that they're not all in one row. And I was talking to somebody this week who said that her purple cauliflowers had all been aphid infested. They were all together and they'd all been aphid infested, but one that was some distance away had not been infested. So if you do have all the one kind of vegetable together, you are more likely to get an aphid infestation. The more flowers and herbs that you put into a garden, the more beneficial predators you'll attract and the less problem you'll have with things like aphids. Corn is always planted in a grid pattern. You can plant it in punnets and transplant it, or you can put it direct into the garden. I do it in punnets because I want to be sure that, because I'm spacing them in a grid, usually a grid is a minimum of 6 plants across by 6 plants down. So a square or a grid of 36 plants. And this is because they're wind pollinated. Never grow corn in a straight row. You won't get sufficient pollination. But I want to make sure that I have a plant in every one of those 36 spots. So beans, broad beans and peas, you can plant these in rows or you can broadcast them. I particularly do this with bush peas because as they come up, they tangle with each other and that supports them. You can also, for bush beans and peas, use prunings from your fruit trees, make them into a little teepee or just cross them, and they'll grow up those. Or you could use a trellis or bamboo wigwams for taller growing beans and peas. I grew my broad beans this year among the corn stalks from last year. I left those in, and I'll just be putting, as they get a bit taller, some string latticed around the corn stalks, and that works quite well. You would want to soak broad beans, peas, beans and beetroot seed overnight before planting. Soak it for 12 hours. You can put a little bit of sea salt in with it. Don't leave it longer than 12 hours, because once they start to shoot, then you've left it too long. And you could do it as little as 8 hours, that'd be fine. Okay. Now I've put garlic and potatoes on this particular slide. Garlic essentially grows in the first place from a seed, and these must go directly into the soil. I have seen garlic and potatoes in punnets and I'm appalled. It just shouldn't happen. These are plants that need, or seeds that need to go directly into the soil. With potatoes, next newsletter, there's an article on how to grow potatoes, but essentially you either put small potatoes straight into the ground, buy certified seed potatoes so they're disease-free, or a larger potato you can cut so that each has an eye. So an eye is that little indentation where a shoot will come from, and then you leave them out of the ground for a couple of days so the faces dry off, and then you can plant them. And garlic, we have so much on the website about how to plant garlic and how to get a good crop that you can look it up there. Now, there are some plants that you can directly plant onto compost mounds, and these are the cucurbit family, including zucchini, pumpkin, cucumber and melons. I don't do this, and the reason I don't do it is that birds love to scratch around in the mounds and they scratch the plants out. Mice and rats come and have a feast on the stems and kill them off. So I prefer to grow them in punnets, select the strongest plants and put them out. What I do, if I did put them straight into a mound, I would put 3 seeds at 3 different points in a triangular shape on the top of the mound. And then I would put some wire netting over it to try and keep the birds off at least, but I won't keep the mice and the rats away. And be assured that rats are not any reflection on you. They are just everywhere. They were washed down in that flood we had a few years ago from, up some Hurstbridge, St Andrews way. They've migrated because their homes have been disturbed along the railway line, Northeast Link. The high school at the moment is redeveloping. So every time the earth is dug up and rat nests are disturbed, they head for juicier territory, let's say. It is important, if you're going to poison them though, well, it's really better not to poison them, to trap them, because owls are dying off because they're eating rats or mice that have been baited. So I would also refer you to an article on the website about protecting our birds of prey and not poisoning rats and mice. Okay, so Paul, if you would take that off the screen, please. Now, preparing your soil for direct sowing means that in general you would prepare your soil to a fine tilth. Now, a fine tilth means a powder-like texture. So you dig over the top of your soil to the depth that your vegetable is going to grow. So let's say you're growing a carrot that's going to be 15 centimetres long. You need to prepare your soil to a depth of 15 centimetres plus a little bit. Often people say to a spade's depth, but if you've got really baby carrots, you don't need to prepare it any longer than your expectation of how long that will grow. The same goes for onions, any root vegetables, etc. So you dig it over, you remove any rocks, or you break up any sods, any twigs, any roots. Roots can put out toxic chemicals to deter other things from growing in competition with them. So if there are roots, take them out. And it's important to make the area weed free, particularly because some weeds harbour viruses. For example, the deadly nightshade weed harbours a virus that attacks the Solanaceae family, which are tomatoes, capsicum, eggplant, potato. It's a Solanaceae family plant as well. There are thistles that harbour viruses that attack lettuces and give them this patchy yellow appearance. I think it's called yellow virus something or other. So make sure that not only is your area weeded, but adjacent areas are weeded as well, to prevent viruses being transmitted between weeds and your veggies. So having prepared your soil to a fine tilth, if it needs liming or dolomiting, and this requires you to do a pH test, I suggest everybody gets a pH kit. They're about $25. You could share it with a neighbour. But if you need to lime or dolomite, you need to do that 4 or 5 weeks before you plant, and a month before you add manure, because the lime or the dolomite will tie up the nutrients in the manure. So that's a good tip. If you're planting in rows, use the handle of a rake or a length of bamboo, or even the side of a paling, to make an indentation to the depth that you need to plant your seed. And this is like I was talking about before in terms of firming down the seed bed in a punnet. You don't want your seed, especially fine seed, falling right through. And then water that so that you've got a damp seed bed, and mark your row so you know what's in it. If you need to dig down deeper, which you might for some seeds, then you can do that and then firm it again. Put your seeds in, cover with soil and water again, and await germination. Germination, as I said before, will depend on the temperature of the soil, which is cooler than air temperature. So early in the season, it may take longer for something to germinate than later in the season. If you're broadcasting your seed, then rake the soil away to the depth that you want to plant the seed. Just sprinkle it everywhere, and then rake the soil back over the top, water, etc. I particularly like broadcasting peas and Asian greens. Peas because they tangle up with each other and support each other, but Asian greens because when you grow them really close together, the insects can't get down to them and they don't chew them. If you spread out your Asian greens, you'll rarely be able to harvest anything worth eating because it'll be completely decimated by various insects. Now, mulching. Don't mulch over seeds. Mulch retains moisture, so it's damp, and that can cause damping off, as I talked about before, and can kill the emerging shoots. However, a good way of both preventing birds scratching at your seed, and let's say I'm really talking here root vegetable seeds. A good way of preventing birds scratching them out and being able to put some mulch down that doesn't cover them is to put a fence paling, an old fence paling, over the row of seed. And so you water it once and then you don't need to water it again. And just check every now and again. And as soon as the seedling shoots through the surface, you can remove your fence paling and you'll be right. And you can, as I said, mulch between the palings if you're doing a number of rows. So, Paul, can we have advantages of direct sowing on the screen, please? So the advantages are that there is no transplant shock. The plants establish well. They come up at an optimum time too, temperature-wise, and the seedlings are hardier. Now, the disadvantages are that you plant later. You need to wait until the soil is warm and relatively dry. Another disadvantage is other veggies may still be producing in the space where you want to sow, and you want to leave those veggies so that you get the maximum harvest from them. Root vegetables will need to be thinned, and they're more prone to insect attack when very young. And you can use the measures that I talked about for snails and slugs, etc., before, but there are other things that will attack them. Just one thing that I haven't put there is that Paul and I net all our vegetables, and we do it for several reasons. One, in the summer vegetables to prevent Queensland fruit fly attack, but in winter it's particularly to prevent cockatoo attack. So the cockies fly down and they nip your seedlings off at the base and they leave them for you as a present, which is incredibly irritating. So yes, cocky attack. The only thing I would say is keep checking under your net, because net, even though it's quite fine, will warm up what's underneath. And there's an advantage to that, but it can allow aphids to develop. And of course, when you've got a net, your beneficial insects aren't going to get in there to get rid of your aphids. What you can do if you get aphids is give it a spray with soapy water, or give it a hard spray with the hose. Take your net off for a while, and hopefully that'll, when I say a while, maybe for a few hours, to let some beneficial insects in and to cool it down. Okay, so Paul, we can remove that one. If you're planting brassicas or corn or your peas and beans, you don't really need a fine tilth, but you do need to get rid of break up the clods and get rid of stones and sticks and roots. Yeah. Now, I'm just going to talk about big seeds, medium seeds and small seeds. So I'll start with big seeds. So big seeds are things that I would consider to be broad beans, pumpkins, zucchinis, cucumbers. They're very easy to sow. You work out what the depth is from the packet and you just either push them, make a hole and push them in, or you rake back your soil, put them down and cover them. Here's a tip though for pumpkin, cucumber and zucchini seeds. First of all, if they're nice and plump, they're going to be viable. If they're very flat, be suspicious, and I would definitely do your seed viability test. What I would say is that it is very difficult to get viable seed from zucchinis and cucumbers, not so hard from pumpkins. But if you put them in flat like that, particularly if they've got some kind of curvature in the surface, water is likely to pool on the top of them and they'll rot. So the best way to put them in is so the pointy bit is, can you see that? I'm not sure that you can. The pointy bit at the top is the top, and put them in vertically so that any water runs off the seed and doesn't rot it. All right, so I'm going to move on to medium seed. So I tend to turn medium seed as beetroot seed, or say coriander seed, something that you can pick up and place where you want it, which you can't do with really tiny seed. Now, you're not going to be able to see this up close, but seeds like beetroot and spinach and silver beet are composite seeds, and that means that there's several seeds or embryos within each seed. So when these come up, you are going to have to thin them out. Then very tiny seed, I adore seed. It's just so interesting, the different shapes and sizes, etc., and the different seed pods. This is radish, which is kind of sort of roundish and flat. Chervil, which is very long seed. They're just like little wisps. What else have I got here? Bok choy, little round seeds. If you're saving your own seed, the way to get rid of most of the chaff is to put them in a basin and just blow, and the chaff will blow off the top. Or you could fold a sheet of A4 down the middle and put your seed on it, put it on a slope with a basin underneath, and the seed will run down and you blow upwards and get rid of the chaff. But really, chaff doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you're putting chaff in, it's just a bit of extra organic material. Now, a way to sow very fine seed like carrot seed is to use these old spice jars. Now, can you see this? See these lids? These are ideal for putting fine seed in, or even slightly bigger seed in this one, and just sowing them along your rows. Another way of spreading a seed like carrot seed out would be to mix it with some sharp sand and put it in a bottle like this and just sprinkle it along your row. And then you don't have to do so much thinning. When your root vegetable seed comes up and it's very close together, when it's very little, you can transplant it. But really, I wouldn't transplant it when it's more than about 2 to 3 centimetres big. Doesn't do well, and make sure that you water it in really, really well. Another thing you can use is sand in an old salt container. Wash out your salt container first, but then put in some sharp sand. So sharp sand is river sand. It's not really beach sand, because beach sand is so fine that it really won't spread your seed all that well. And just mix it up with your seed and spread it out that way. Now, what's next?
So, Robin, I might just tell you at this point, we've got a number of questions.
Yeah, well, I was just about to say it's time to hand over to questions, because I've said all I want to say.
Well said. Good timing, perhaps. So the first question, I think you answered Makoto's question about pruning the mulberry, which is not a seed question, but
All right. So essentially, if you've got a small mulberry, prune it in winter. If you've got a mulberry that's going berserk, prune it in summer because it will be calmer in summer, and prune out kind of every second branch.
Great. Would that be fair to say that that applies to other fruit trees to some extent?
All right. Well, in terms of fruit trees, when you prune in winter, the sap rises in the tree and you will get enormous amount of growth. When you prune in spring and summer, and that's what you and I do, we prune halfway through spring, halfway through summer, the tree is much calmer, the sap isn't rising, and you can prune then and you don't get all that extra growth. So in general, a tree will try and replace all the growth that you cut off it. So doing spring and summer is a way of keeping them lower. And I won't go into it, but there are really good ways of keeping trees lower, which we need to do now that we've got Queensland fruit fly in the area, so that we can get to all the fruit on the top, and for other reasons. But if you look on the website for thinning and heading cuts, you'll find plenty of information there.
Mm-hmm. So just in keeping with fruit trees, what are the best flowers and herbs? No, this is a valid question. What are the best flowers and herbs to promote predators? In other words, good predators, not the bad kind.
Okay, your beneficial insects.
The beneficial insects.
Well,
yes.
The very best things are yellow and white flowers, small yellow and white flowers. So feverfew, chamomile, but anything that's yellow, anything that's white, but basically anything. So bees can get into flowers with deep throats, but beneficial insects can't. So beneficial insects need sort of flat composite daisy family type flowers where they can just sit on the top and pollinate, etc.
Right. So now there's another interesting question. Do we know anything about peanut growing?
No.
Thought that might be a short answer.
On that one.
I'm sure there's information around. Perhaps that's something we could follow up. Now Marina's asking, she has fresh pumpkin seeds. Should she dry them before she sows them?
Now this is a very good question, Marina. Certainly they'll grow if you don't dry them. I guess you generally dry them because you want to store them for the next season. But something I failed to say, and this has prompted me to remember it, is that some seeds cross-pollinate, so you won't get what you got the previous season. So let's say you grew a Queensland blue pumpkin from commercial seed, and you got really good Queensland blue pumpkins, and you decide to save the seed, that will have cross-pollinated. Bees can cross-pollinate pumpkins from up to 8 kilometres away. So what you'll get will be something else, unless you cover the flowers and you self-pollinate between the males to the females with a paintbrush. You can do it that way to keep it true. So I always suggest that people buy commercial seed for pumpkins, zucchinis, cucumbers, and brassicas. Brassicas, your collies, broccolis, etc., they cross-pollinate, and what you will end up with is basically nothing, like a feathery lot of leaves. Tomatoes, by and large, don't cross-pollinate. However, there is a variety of a section of tomatoes called potato leaf, and the leaves look like potato leaves. So they're like your brandywines, particularly your brandywines. and they will cross-pollinate with other tomatoes. And this year we've had to buy in a whole lot of commercial seed for our tomatoes, because what we got last year was not really exactly what it should have been in terms of, say, like the violet jaspers were losing their stripes, the brown berries were coming up bigger and slightly different colour, etc.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, Anne has a couple of questions which are related. She was a bit concerned about planting out and perhaps digging up the soil to plant, which might also interfere with the soil
Structure.
Life.
Yeah. Look, it's certainly a problem. And I'm not really sure what the way around it is. With root crops, I think it's essential that you prepare a fine tilth. But you might do that in a wicking bed, for example, or a raised bed. I'm becoming a very big fan of regenerative farming, which completely keeps the soil covered with a crop all the time. So you might put in a green manure crop and you slash it. And then they do something that's called crimping. I'm not sure what that is, to get as much of the slashed material into the top of the soil. I imagine it's just a pushing down into the soil without really disturbing the structure. But what you've got is you've got your roots left in, and you create biomass by growing a mix of cereal and legumes. And then biomass in the soil not only sequesters carbon, which is fantastic, but it creates a water retentive soil, which is excellent. Now, the way regenerative farmers do it is, having slashed the soil, the crop, and crimped it in, then they just go along and plant straight into that. So they might be planting, say, cauliflowers, and they're just planting the seedlings mechanically straight into that.
Mm-hmm.
Bev Middleton, who did a terrific regenerative farming and workshop recently, I think, what do we call it? The dirt on healthy soil, or how to make dirt the healthy soil.
Dirt and climate change.
Which is on our YouTube channel.
Yep.
So we've been thinking about how we can do this both in our own gardens, at the community garden, because I really take the point, we don't want to break up the structure of the soil if we can possibly help it. So what that really means is, let's say if you're putting in a brassica, lots of brassicas, just dig a hole.
And that answers Anne's second question about whether you dig a hole or whether you dig over the whole bed.
Yeah, no. Right. In that case, you can just dig a hole. On that point, I did put a green manure crop into the bed that I've now planted garlic in, and we have a gardener for 2 hours a fortnight now, which is fabulous. And he was amazed at how spongy the soil was when a few weeks, maybe 6 weeks after we dug that crop in.
Mm.
And the garlic's terrific.
Yes, it is. Marina DR is interested in whether grow lights are useful.
Oh, I wouldn't bother personally. Unless you're doing a marijuana crop in the ceiling.
Very good. For which you probably need a fair number of solar panels if you're going to feed the amount of energy you need.
Electricity bill.
Yes. Jared is asking if sprouting jars are any use.
No. When something sprouts, it's not actually putting roots down. So it's the embryo germinating, but it doesn't have, it's not producing roots at that point. So sprouting jars are just for eating.
Yep, excellent. I think it's Vic wanted to know if he should store seeds or they should store seeds in the fridge.
Oh, now I would have to do a bit more research on that. I think some seeds you can store in the fridge. Some with garlic, you can put your garlic in the fridge for 40 days before you plant it out, and it gives it a false winter. I was thinking about this earlier. I like to store my seeds in jars, so I put them through the dishwasher and make sure they're absolutely dry, or in the seed packets. So these are just little things I think you can get from Office Works. The reason I like them in these is if there is any moisture, the packet will dry them out. If there's any moisture in a jar, you'll see it straight off. It'll be on the inside of the jar, and you've probably already done your seed in. And then I store them under a bed because I want them in a warm, airy place or a cool, airy place, not too much warmth, but in a dark place so that the sun's not directly on them. But I have heard of storing some seeds, but I'm not sure whether it's all seeds in the fridge.
Right. And the final question is from Mikoto, and she wants to know if it's a good idea to cover seedlings now with a half-cupped plastic bottle as a kind of mini greenhouse, both against cold and against pests.
Okay, if they're in the garden, yes, but not if you're growing them indoors.
Yep, that's right, and that's the end of the questions. So I wanted to do a couple of things. One is to say that we'll make this video available on YouTube through our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and find Sustainable Macleod. Also, very quickly, somebody's pointed out that the Sustainable Macleod website page where you can join, the first joining button, or I think it's a register button, doesn't work. You need to scroll down the page to the second one if you're wanting to join up. Sorry about that little insert in there. That's the end, I think, of the questions and essentially of our workshop. So I'd like to thank Robin very much for a great workshop. Yep. And of course, if people have any questions, they're welcome to send them via the Sustainable Macleod email system. We can find a way of answering those, I'm sure. And thank you.
And thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thanks everybody for attending. It's great. We've had 30 people online, and it's always heartening to know that you're all out there and listening and watching, even if we can't do it in person. So I'm going to put up a slide again with the workshops that are coming up that I think were mentioned by Emily. Just make a note of those if you're interested. They'll all be on Zoom. So.
And Paul, I believe links to those will be on the events page on our website sometime over this weekend.
Great. Okay, so here they are. And thank you, everyone.
Okay, hope to see you again in 2 weeks.